She genuinely thought she would completely destroy him, but she was entirely and catastrophically wrong. The evidence was simply too staggering. $370,000 in campaign funds paid directly to her lover's company, an exposed email where her own brother called her sister while thanking her for immigration papers, and a chilling WhatsApp message where she explicitly told activists to use the grief of 9 over 11 families as a political weapon. All of it was exposed, all of it was meticulously documented, and all of it was laid bare on live television by a 2-year-old senator from Louisiana who never once raised his voice. I have spent more years than I care to count watching congressional hearings. I have sat in those grand rooms when history was being made, and more often, when absolutely nothing was being accomplished, which, let me tell you, is most of the time. I have watched senators grandstand for the cameras, congresswomen cry on cue for sympathy, and committee chairs bang their gavels aggressively over absolutely nothing. I have seen political careers launched into the stratosphere and careers ended in disgrace, but what happened on this particular day in that specific hearing room was something I had never seen before in all my years in Washington. It was not just a hearing, it was a profound reckoning, a methodical, document-by-document destruction of one of the most protected and shielded politicians in Washington. By the end of it, she was entirely finished, not dismantled by shouting, not by partisan tricks or political theater, but by undeniable paper, by hard evidence, and by the cold truth. Let me tell you exactly how it happened. Every single word, every document, and every moment her face changed. It started exactly the way she wanted it to start. Ilhan Omar stood in the packed hearing room, pointing a finger directly at John Kennedy, and she launched the first aggressive strike. She boldly proclaimed that he represented everything wrong with America's past, characterizing him as the embodiment of the shameful legacy of prejudice against immigrants and Muslims that the country desperately needed to overcome. Her voice rang loudly through the House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing room. She had been granted special questioning privileges for what was supposed to be a completely routine hearing on refugee resettlement policies. But it was immediately clear she was not there for policy discussions. She was there for a viral takedown. She stared at Senator Kennedy and accused him of sitting there in his expensive suit with his southern drawl, pretending to care about human rights, while his entire career had allegedly been built on excluding people exactly like her from the American dream. The gallery instantly erupted in applause. The progressive activists had arrived long before dawn. Many wore hijabs in solidarity, and several enthusiastically held signs reading "Refugees Welcome" and "No Human is Illegal." The mainstream media section was packed shoulder to shoulder with reporters whose stories about Kennedy's impending and guaranteed humiliation were already half written on their glowing laptops. I could see it clearly from where I sat. They had their sensational headlines ready, and they just needed the final quotes to hit publish. But here is where the entire narrative got exceptionally interesting, my friends. Because John Kennedy of Louisiana just sat quietly and patiently at the witness table as Omar's attacks grew increasingly personal. Several of us in the room noticed something peculiar, the slight, knowing upturn at the corner of his mouth, as if he were thoroughly enjoying a private joke that no one else was in on yet. I have seen that exact look before on the face of a man who knows exactly what cards the other person is holding. Omar continued, her voice rising dramatically, claiming he had never known true struggle or persecution, never had to flee his homeland, never spent agonizing years in a refugee camp, and never had to build a life from absolutely nothing in a country where people like him allegedly viewed people like her as threats to be eliminated rather than humans to be welcome. She paused dramatically for the applause, and she got it. She demanded to know what he could possibly know about the refugee experience and what qualified him to sit in judgment of policies affecting the most vulnerable people on earth. Now, every single person watching at home already knew exactly what Omar was doing. This was her heavily utilized playbook. It was the exact same playbook she had used since the very first day she arrived in Washington. Attack the identity, make it deeply personal, force the other side to passionately defend themselves instead of asking questions, and brilliantly turn the accuser into the accused. She had used it 100 times, and it had worked 100 times because nobody in that chamber ever came truly prepared. Nobody ever brought the necessary receipts, and nobody ever did the grueling homework. Until today, the man who actually did the homework was sitting right there with a simple manila folder and a polite smile that should have immediately warned her. Kennedy continued calmly taking notes on the legal pad before him. When Omar finally paused, fully expecting him to be rattled, defensive, or angry, He looked up with what appeared to be genuine, disarming warmth. He thanked her for her passionate speech about struggle and persecution. "Ma'am," Kennedy said in that distinctive Louisiana drawl of his, with each word carefully measured and wrapped in traditional Southern courtesy, "you raise important points about understanding different experiences, and speaking of experiences, perhaps we should explore yours a bit more thoroughly." He slowly opened the manila folder that had been sitting firmly closed on the table throughout her entire aggressive tirade. The committee room, which had been loudly buzzing with whispered conversations and political energy, went quiet, dead quiet. Let me tell you what I noticed in that precise moment. It was not what Kennedy said, it was her eyes. In the split second that folder opened, something fundamental shifted behind her eyes. She knew she did not know what was in that folder yet, but she knew deep down it was not going to be a standard policy debate. Kennedy smoothly continued, extracting a document, and stated that since she mentioned building a life from nothing in America, they should discuss exactly how she built that life. Specifically, he suggested they talk about her marriage in 2009. Omar's confident expression visibly flickered. She immediately tried to shut it down, declaring her personal life had nothing to do with the hearing, but Kennedy interrupted her gently. He explained that questions had been raised about this particular marriage to Mr. Ahmed Nur Syed Elmi. He paused, carefully studying the document in his hands, before dropping the hammer. "Your brother." The committee room completely erupted. Progressive supporters shouted loud accusations of lies and Islamophobia. Reporters frantically began typing breaking news alerts, and several Democratic committee members looked genuinely and deeply confused by the accusation. Omar's face had gone from supremely confident to entirely frozen. She aggressively countered that it was a disgusting conspiracy theory that had been thoroughly debunked. "Has it?" Kennedy asked mildly. "And this, my friends, is exactly where the Southern gentleman began to teach a master class in political accountability, because he did not argue, and he did not engage in a screaming debate. He simply pulled out documents, one after another after another. He calmly pulled out educational records from the United Kingdom showing that Mr. Elmi attended school there, listing the exact same father's name as the one that appears on Omar's official refugee document. He then pulled out sworn affidavits from members of the Minneapolis Somali community, firmly confirming the family relationship. Then he paused, exactly the way a confident man pauses when he is about to lay down the winning hand at a poker table. He announced that he had records showing that she, her cultural husband Ahmed Hirsi, and her legal husband Mr. Elmi all lived at the exact same address in Columbia Heights, Minnesota. The silence in the room was absolutely deafening. Even Omar's most ardent vocal supporters had entirely stopped shouting. You could physically feel the air change in that space. That room went from a political rally to a federal courtroom in 3 seconds flat. Kennedy continued in the exact same conversational tone, noting that in most cultures, it is highly unusual for a woman to live with both her husband and her brother, and it is even more unusual when she is legally married to the brother but filing taxes jointly with the other man. I have watched a lot of politicians frantically try to corner someone with documents, and most of them fail spectacularly because they get overly excited, they rush the delivery, and they editorialize the evidence. Kennedy did none of that. He just kept pulling paper out of that folder like a normal man, casually unpacking groceries. He was calm, he was methodical, and he was completely devastating. He produced tax returns from 2014 and 2015, showing Omar had filed jointly with Hirsi while being legally married to Elmi. He politely informed her that this was tax fraud, but more importantly, if Mr. Elmi was indeed her brother, as the mounting evidence suggested. Then they were looking at immigration fraud, a serious federal crime involving helping a family member obtain U.S. citizenship through a sham marriage. Omar finally found her voice, though it entirely lacked its earlier commanding strength, and she claimed these were fabricated documents and nothing but a racist attack. Kennedy interrupted with exaggerated, calculated politeness, noting that math isn't Islamophobic and DNA isn't racist. Speaking of DNA, he pulled out yet another document, revealing it was a formal request from the Daily Mail newspaper dated October 2019, explicitly asking her to take a simple DNA test to disprove these allegations once and for all, a request she had refused multiple times. He reasonably pointed out that if Mr. Elmi wasn't her brother, a simple DNA test would clear the entire situation up immediately. Now, let me stop here and tell you what I saw happen next. because the television cameras did not catch it. One of the Democratic committee members quietly reached up, removed her eye stand with Ilhan pin, and placed it face down on her desk. Others were frantically checking their glowing phones. The political rats were already desperately calculating the distance to the lifeboats, and Kennedy had barely even started. "But we're just getting started," Kennedy said cheerfully, organizing his massive stack of papers for the next revelation. He suggested they continue exploring exactly how she had built her American success story, noting the committee would be very interested in her campaign finance activities. Omar gripped the edge of the witness table so tightly her knuckles turned white. The confident hunter had abruptly become the hunted, and everyone in that room could plainly see it. Kennedy adjusted his glasses and pulled out a completely new section from his folder. I could see the label clearly from where I sat. It read, "Immigration Records, Omar Elmi." The committee room remained tensely, uncomfortably quiet, as the earlier chaos had been entirely replaced by the heavy atmosphere of a courtroom, watching crucial, undeniable evidence being presented. He began to explore her marriage timeline in excruciating detail, his tone suggesting he was patiently explaining something incredibly simple to a stubborn child. He established that according to public records, in 2002 she entered into an Islamic faith marriage with Ahmed Abdisalan Hirsi, which she confirmed through a clenched jaw. He established she had 2 children with Mr. Hirsi during this time. He then established that in 2008 she separated from Mr. Hirsi, not legally divorced since they weren't legally married, but separated. Kennedy nodded slowly as if filing away vital information, and then noted that in 2009 she legally married Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, with a formal certificate filed with the state of Minnesota. When she tried to protest that she had already explained this, Kennedy patiently insisted on establishing the hard facts first. This specific technique is what separates Kennedy from every other senator I have watched in 30 long years. He was not asking questions to learn the answers. He already knew every single answer. He was building an inescapable cage, bar by bar, question by question, deliberately making her confirm each individual fact on the permanent record so that when the heaviest evidence landed, she had already permanently locked herself into the timeline. There was absolutely nowhere left to run. He produced a series of documents and meticulously laid them out on the table. He revealed lease agreements, utility bills, and voter registrations proving that during her legal marriage to Mr. Elmi, all 3 of them herself, Mr. Hirsi, with whom she had children, and Mr. Elmi, to whom she was legally married, were consistently living at the exact same address in Columbia Heights. He looked up at the silent committee and noted that where he comes from in Louisiana, that is what they call a mighty unusual living arrangement. Nervous, uncomfortable laughter rippled through the room, and several Democratic committee members were now actively and deliberately avoiding making eye contact with Omar. But it got more unusual, Kennedy continued, because while she was living in this communal situation, she was also actively helping Mr. Elmi with his education. He pulled out Mr. Elmi's student visa application for North Dakota State University, explicitly sponsored by his wife Omar, which made him eligible for in-state tuition and, far more importantly, legally able to stay in the United States. When Omar tried to brush this off as circumstantial, Kennedy's smile widened as he pulled out his next major surprise. He revealed printed screenshots of social media posts she thought were permanently deleted, reminding her that the internet is forever. He showed an Instagram post from Mr. Elmi in 2013 where he specifically referred to her daughter as his niece, not his stepdaughter, which she would legally be if he were merely her husband. Kennedy noted that niece was a very interesting word choice. The progressive supporters in the gallery had gone completely, utterly silent. Some were actually beginning to slowly edge toward the exits to escape the unfolding disaster. But there was more. Kennedy examined educational records from the United Kingdom where Mr. Elmi attended high school, producing official documents bearing British government seals that listed his father's name as Nur Saeed Elmi. He then produced Omar's refugee application from 1995, listing her father's name as Nur Saeed Elmi. With an expression of mock confusion, he stated that either this was the world's most remarkable, statistically impossible coincidence, or Mr. Ahmed Elmi was indeed her brother, and demanded to know which it was. Omar nearly shouted that her father's name was changed when they came to America, claiming this was a common practice for refugees. Kennedy amicably agreed that it was common, which was exactly why he had his staff dig much deeper. He pulled out yet another set of papers, sworn affidavits from 6 different members of the Minneapolis Somali community, all given under strict penalty of perjury. They all firmly confirmed that Ahmed Elmi was her brother. One of them, Mrs. Fadumo Hassan, explicitly stated she knew the family in Somalia before they fled and was quite specific and detailed about the family relationships. The tension in that room was a heavy, suffocating weight you could literally feel on your skin. Even the seasoned C-SPAN camera operators seemed to be paying much closer attention than usual. You could hear every single breath, every nervous pen click, and every uncomfortable cough. Kennedy's voice dropped to a much more serious tone as he announced the smoking gun. He pulled out a printed email exchange between Omar and Mr. Elmi from 2011, successfully retrieved through a Freedom of Information Act request. He noted she thought it was deleted, but government servers have incredibly long memories. He read Elmi's message aloud. "Thanks for helping me get papers, sister. I'll make sure to pay you back when I get to London." He then read her direct response. "No need to pay back. Family helps family. Just be careful and delete these emails." Audible gasps echoed through the committee room, and one Democratic member muttered something highly unprintable, loud enough for the hot microphones to pick up. Kennedy slowly repeated the phrase, "Thanks for helping me get papers, sister," emphasizing sister instead of wife, and noted her response about family helping family was pretty clear. Omar's face had gone from highly defensive to purely desperate, as she claimed the email was entirely fake and fabricated. Kennedy innocently asked if it was fabricated by the State Department, because that is exactly where this date-stamped, authenticated email came from, provided under the Freedom of Information Act. Let me tell you something profound about that specific moment. I have seen countless politicians lie, and I have seen them lie incredibly well. But when Omar said fabricated, and Kennedy simply replied State Department, you could see the exact second her brain fully processed the devastating fact that the lie would absolutely not work. It was exactly like watching someone confidently step off a high cliff and realize in midair that there is absolutely no ground beneath them. He was far from done. He pivoted to the severe tax implications of this complex arrangement, noting that while legally married to Mr. Elmi, she filed joint tax returns with Mr. Hirsi in 2014 and 2015. He held up the physical documents, her signature clearly and undeniably visible. He stated she signed these under penalty of perjury, illegally claiming to be married to a man she wasn't, while being legally married to another man entirely. When she frantically claimed she had already corrected those filings, Kennedy clarified that she only did so after conservative journalists started investigating. He firmly stated that correcting tax fraud after the fact does not magically make it not tax fraud, it just makes it fully admitted tax fraud. He pulled out one final, devastating document from this section. It was from the IRS Criminal Division, confirming they had officially opened an investigation based on these fraudulent returns, particularly focusing on the fact that she illegally claimed tax benefits she was not entitled to by filing jointly with someone she was not legally married to. 3 Democratic committee members physically stood up and left the room entirely. The mass exodus was beginning, and let me tell you, my friends, there is absolutely no sound in Washington quite like the sound of political allies disappearing. It is the quietest, most devastating thing you will ever witness. Leaning back in his chair, Kennedy expressed what truly troubled him. It wasn't just the severe federal crimes of immigration and tax fraud, but the fact that when she was caught, instead of coming clean, she viciously attacked anyone who questioned her as racist and Islamophobic. She cowardly used her identity as a shield while committing serious crimes that would land any other average American in federal prison. Every person watching at home already knew this truth. They had known it for years, but they just desperately needed someone to finally say it on the official record, under the bright lights, with the cameras rolling. And Kennedy said it flawlessly. He gestured to the mountain of documents spread before him, summarizing her American success story as marriage fraud to get her brother citizenship, tax fraud to steal benefits, and then cynically playing the victim when finally caught. Omar's hands were visibly shaking at this point. Her chief aide was whispering urgently in her ear, likely advising her to invoke the Fifth Amendment, and immediately stop talking. She stammered that she needed to consult with her attorney. Kennedy graciously agreed, but warned her that they were just getting started, teasing the upcoming revelations about her campaign finance violations as particularly illuminating. He smiled, that gentle, terrifying Southern smile that had completely gutted her side of the room, and suggested a 5-minute break so folks could make urgent phone calls to their attorneys, their wealthy campaign donors, or their fellow Democrats who were actively reconsidering their political support right about now. The committee chairman, who looked as though he had aged a full 10 years in merely 30 minutes, reluctantly called for a recess. When the committee finally reconvened, several seats on the Democratic side remained conspicuously and permanently empty. Omar had returned, now heavily flanked by two nervous attorneys who looked as though they would rather be literally anywhere else on earth. Her earlier bravado and confidence had evaporated entirely, fully replaced by the hunted, desperate look of someone who knew the worst was still yet to come. Kennedy, looking refreshed by the short break, opened a new section of his heavily laden folder marked Campaign Finance Minute. His tone suggested this segment would be even more politically damaging than what came before. He initiated a discussion about her relationship with Mr. Tim Minette and his company E Street Group. According to concrete Federal Election Commission records, her campaign paid Mr. Minette's company approximately $370,000 between 2018 and 2019, during which time she was actively having an extramarital affair with him. When she weakly protested that her personal relationships were off-limits, Kennedy smoothly interrupted, declaring they are absolutely relevant when donor campaign funds are heavily involved. He pulled out a thick legal document, the sworn divorce deposition of Mrs. Beth Minette, given under oath in D.C. Superior Court. He read aloud that her husband admitted in April 2019 to having an affair with Congresswoman Omar, taking personal campaign trips together. When the wife asked how they afforded luxury travel, he explicitly replied not to worry because Ilhan's campaign was covering absolutely everything. The room went dead silent again. Even the fast-typing reporters had frozen. Kennedy conversationally noted that this might just be her word, but then he pulled out the devastating receipts. He presented credit card receipts from romantic dinners for two in Nice, France, paid for by Omar for Congress, and a couple's luxury spa retreat in Napa Valley. He showed hotel suites with a single bed in cities where absolutely no official campaign events were scheduled, all directly billed to hardworking Minnesota donors. Kennedy forced the room to think about those regular people who scraped together $20 or $50 to support a political cause, only to have their money fund spa retreats and French dinners. He bluntly called it theft, not politics. When she protested they were legitimate expenses, Kennedy connected his phone to the audio system and played a recorded text message from Mr. Minette to his wife during the divorce proceedings. A man's voice echoed through the silent room, demanding she stop calling about money and reiterating that Ilhan's campaign was paying for everything, urging patience until the divorce was final. Several people audibly gasped. One of Omar's own staffers was physically seen burying her head in her hands in sheer embarrassment. Kennedy did not stop. He moved to the period after her affair became public and she married Minette in March 2020. The payments did not stop. They massively increased. Her campaign paid her new husband's company another $1.1 million in 2020 alone, instantly making him one of the highest-paid political consultants in America, which Kennedy dryly called quite a wedding gift. Kennedy used his trademark simple country lawyer from Louisiana line, which every politician knows means the lethal kill shot is loading. He bluntly stated that using donor funds to enrich a lover and spouse is the illegal conversion of campaign funds for personal use, a serious federal crime. He then cited the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board findings, revealing she was found guilty multiple times of violation. She used $3,469 for personal travel and $1,500 to pay for personal tax preparation to specifically correct the fraudulent joint returns discussed earlier. He called using campaign funds to cover up tax fraud creative, but his favorite receipt showed she used $6,000 in campaign funds to pay her own divorce attorney to separate from Mr. Elmy, her brother, so she could seamlessly marry Mr. Minette. The remaining progressive activists were quietly removing their solidarity hijabs and fleeing the room. The abandonment had become a full stampede. Kennedy then introduced Mr. Minette's latest venture, the North Side Wine Group, asking an angry man in the gallery, Mr. Naeem Moed, to stand up. Moad invested $300,000 in the business 3 years ago and hadn't seen. Minette allegedly used that money to purchase the $1.3 million D.C. mansion where Omar currently lived. Moad shouted that they used his children's college fund, showing fake contracts and claiming the congresswoman's position guaranteed lucrative government contract. Kennedy gently thanked Moad and produced Omar's 2023 financial disclosure form, showing she reported income between $100,000 and $1 million from this fraudulent company, making her an active accessory after the fact. Kennedy revealed a civil suit had been filed for racketeering, and the FBI had opened a wire fraud investigation. Her lawyer sat down completely defeated, recognizing his client was utterly indefensible. Kennedy announced they were not done, reaching for an even darker section of his seemingly bottomless folder. This section went beyond federal crimes and straight into her true character. His gentle mockery vanished, replaced by a much harder, more serious demeanor. He brought up her statements about Jewish Americans and Israel, calling them a pattern that went to the heart of her fitness to serve in Congress. He highlighted her February 2019 tweet claiming it was all about the Benjamins, baby, and her accusation that AIPAC pays American politicians to be pro-Israel. When she claimed she had apologized, Kennedy noted apologies don't erase the anti-Semitic sentiment. He then produced deleted tweets from January 2019 calling AIPAC puppet masters who buy politicians like groceries, invoking classic anti-Semitic imagery of Jews as shadowy controllers. Jewish Democrats on the committee looked visibly shaken, but he didn't stop at tweets. He played a secret audio recording from a private March 2019 fundraiser in Minneapolis, provided by a disturbed donor. Omar's recorded voice explicitly stated that Jewish members of Congress couldn't be trusted, had divided loyalties, and put Israel first and America second. Kennedy condemned these dual loyalty accusations as the exact same rhetoric used to justify pogroms in Russia, the Dreyfus affair in France, and the horrors of the Holocaust. Two weeping Jewish committee members immediately stood up and walked out of the room. Kennedy then brought up her June 2021 tweet equating the United States and democratic Israel with terrorist organizations like Hamas and the Taliban. When she claimed she was merely calling for accountability, Kennedy fiercely contrasted Hamas's deliberate targeting of civilians with the justice systems of democracies. He then exposed her funding sources, noting she was a frequent guest of honor at fundraisers for CARE, an organization founded by Hamas supporters, and that she accepted donations from board members of the Qatar Foundation, the same state that hosts Hamas leadership. He showed a 2019 photograph of her in a Palestinian refugee camp, warmly smiling and shaking hands with Mahmoud Hassan, a known Hamas operative. He summarized her breathtaking hypocrisy, accusing Jews of dual loyalty while taking money from foreign terrorism supporters. Kennedy then turned to the thickest section of the folder, her most infamous statement, the one that revealed exactly what she thought of America. His demeanor transformed into that of a cold, precise prosecutor. He acknowledged the 9/11 families sitting in the front row before turning to a visibly pale Omar. He played the full video of her March 2019 CARE speech, where she dismissively described the worst attack on American soil as a day when some people did something. Kennedy let those chilling words hang in the air, noting she reduced the murder of 2,977 Americans to a minor incident not worth describing accurately. He systematically destroyed the defense that she merely misspoke. He produced a 2013 transcript where she claimed American military actions created the conditions for retaliation, and a 2013 Somali Forum post where she wrote Americans overreact to 9/11 and use it as an excuse for imperialism. A grieving father in the gallery stood up, shaking with rage, crying that his 2-3-year-old daughter was not a statistic. Kennedy gently calmed him, promising she would answer for it. He then revealed the absolute worst part, authenticated 2019 WhatsApp messages in a group chat with activists, where Omar explicitly wrote, "The American obsession with 9/11 is useful. Use their guilt against them. Make them feel bad for their reaction rather than the attack itself." The room erupted. She saw the murder of thousands not as a tragedy, but as a sick political tool to manipulate grieving families. Kennedy then read from her 2019 FBI security clearance review, where she literally told federal agents that America deserved 9/11 and it was chickens coming home to roost, leading agents to recommend denying her clearance due to her troubling sympathy for anti-American narratives. He finished by reading a damning letter from a respected imam in her own district, stating she brought deep shame to all Muslim Americans and represented only her own hatred. Kennedy finally stood up, towering over the room. He furiously condemned her for dishonoring the memory of the thousands who died, including Muslim first responders, and for seeing mass murder as a political opportunity. He pulled out a document from the Director of National Intelligence, immediately revoking her security clearance and stripping her of access to classified briefings and relevant committees. He announced massive, sweeping investigations by the FBI, IRS, and House Ethics Committee into her fraud, corruption, and anti-Semitism. When she screamed about McCarthyism and being targeted as a strong Muslim woman, Kennedy calmly noted he had 127 pieces of authenticated documentary evidence. He read real-time statements from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Bernie Sanders, all utterly abandoning her, condemning her fraud, and demanding her immediate resignation. He read leaked text messages proving the squad viewed her as a massive liability who was hurting their movement. Chairman Jerry Nadler entered a unanimous statement from every Jewish Democrat demanding she resign, and Speaker Nancy Pelosi officially cut her loose. As Capitol police officers formally entered to escort her out and strip her of her security credentials, she desperately screamed that she was the voice of her community. Kennedy coldly corrected her. She had completely betrayed the Somali community, the Muslim community, the progressive movement, and America itself, repaying its incredible generosity with massive fraud and deep contempt. Her political life was destroyed, her crimes definitively exposed, and her allies entirely gone. The aftermath was a brutal, swift political earthquake. The Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, multiple Muslim representatives, and her own constituents demanded her resignation. The U.S. Attorney, the FBI, and the IRS launched formal investigations into her sprawling criminal enterprise. Senator Kennedy, sitting quietly on his porch in Louisiana, took absolutely no pleasure in the destruction, but correctly noted that the country gave her everything, and she repaid it with lies and hatred. It was a monumental day where the protective shield of identity politics completely failed to stop the undeniable truth, and the American system of justice finally worked.